There he is. Hi everyone, it's me again. Look what's behind me. Here, I'll turn you a little bit. That's all 4 colors of my quilt squares. I can't quite get them all in the frame and myself, and they're obviously much more interesting to look at than I am. So I'm sitting off to the side here. But I finished all the squares. There's those 4 sticking up there. These are the other 12. I did it. I know I'm nowhere near a quilt yet, but I made 16 by 16 inch squares out of tiny pieces of fabric. So this, as I've been talking about in a number of videos on this channel, is the Birdling Quilt pattern. The fabric is Honey Fusion Bundle by Art Gallery Fabrics. That's where I got all the little pattern pieces, and also the 4 shades of yellow that I've turned into this monochromatic lovely. So I just want to show you some more of the blocks up close. This is the palest yellow. This yellow solid is called, I believe, Banana Cream. There's 3 blocks here. I said there's 4 of each color. The 4th one is the one pinned up on the wall so I can stare at them. Then we've got this set of yellow. We've got this yellow, which I believe was called Pineapple, the 2nd yellow in the sequence. Then there's this yellow, which I believe was Turmeric. This is darker than just about everything in the patterned fabrics. That last yellow matched some of the backgrounds. This is darker than all the backgrounds, and maybe matches some of the darker, like, twigs in the floral ones, the branches, and maybe just a couple of the darker flowers. The very first one I made was this darkest version. This solid is called Honey. And I think it's darker than everything in the patterned fabrics. But yeah, I'm so pleased with myself that I finished that. What I need to do now is choose the sashing. Now I have to make a choice. And I think this is something that I don't think the camera is going to pick up. But I have these 2 whites, and they are different. When I was buying all the fabrics, the pattern fabrics came in a fat quarter bundle, and then there was also another bundle listed for the solids that would go with all those pattern fabrics. And so I bought 1 meter of each because I knew I wanted the 4 yellows. I knew I wanted I knew I wanted white of some sort for the sashing, but I just couldn't tell from the computer screen which was going to be better. So at that point, it was just 1 meter. I just bought 1 extra meter of fabric. So it's either this one's lighter, this one's slightly creamier, this is white linen, this one is, I think, creme de la creme or something. All the background fabrics in these blocks are mostly creamier, but there are a couple that are white. Actually, I would say neither of those fabrics that I have is white, which is like this one is white. But yeah, so I need to figure out which is going to look best with all the blocks. And then the other thing I need to figure out is the cornerstones. So in the Birdling pattern, the blocks are separated by white sashing, and like where there's 4 blocks meeting and their sashing meets, there's a little square that in the pattern is done with the scrappy fabric. And I'm not certain what I want to do about that. I know my quilt blocks are not quite the right size. Like somehow all the triangle pieces were just right, and I trimmed them down to the right size. I trimmed these to the right size. But when I sewed up the final blocks, not all of them have this like 1/4 inch. I mean, this is barely a 1/4 inch. That one is not a 1/4 inch. You need to have this like 1/4 inch up here, so when you sew it to the sashing, those points don't disappear. And if I actually trimmed these blocks to 16 by 16 inches like it said, I'd be chopping off, and some of them I'd be chopping into these little corners, and I didn't want to do that. So most of these I think are 16 1/4 or 16 1/2, because I just really couldn't trim that much off of them without losing that seam allowance there. So what I'm thinking I might do is cut my sashing pieces slightly longer than needed, and then just sort of fudge it as I go, to be honest, to get those little lines to match up. So I think what I need to do is lay stuff out on the floor, which means I have to vacuum. Because I have A, a black dog, and B, I just finished a black sewing project out of a very frayable fabric, so there is black thread everywhere, which I do not want getting onto my pale quilt. Because I also have to figure out how I want to arrange these blocks. I think I have an idea of how I want to do it, but because these weren't done yet, I hadn't had the chance to actually lay it out and see what that looks like, or even play with other options. I'm so close. I just have to make some choices, which is honestly the hardest part. And then sew it up, and then I can like hang the whole quilt top off my bookcase and show you everything huge. And it's so exciting, and I think it's what I'm going to do with the rest of my Sunday. Or at least, hopefully I'll make those decisions this Sunday, and then maybe do the sewing during the week. And then could I have a finished quilt top by next weekend? Oh my god! I'll be back with some possible layouts of the blocks, and hopefully a freshly vacuumed floor, and probably a Conan sitting on all of the blocks, because as soon as something goes on the floor, it's Conan's. I'm making a very nice pale quilt for my black dog. Well, it's not particularly for the black dog, but any blanket in this house is Conan's blanket, so it will eventually get covered in black dog hair. Won't it? Yes, it will. Okay, so here is one possible quilt layout. Here you can see my entire living room. And yeah, this quilt is too big for my floor, so it's a good thing I'm going to send it off to get long-armed. So there will be white sashing in between all of these, but I'm just trying to figure out how I want to lay them out. No! I knew that was going to happen. Okay. Imagine that's... No, Conan, come here. Come here. Come here. Yeah, you stay here. This is why I don't cut things out on the floor. So imagine those are still straight and there's no dog there. This layout is going from darkest to lightest there, and then lightest to darkest, and then darkest to lightest, and then lightest to darkest. So that's one way of doing it, but the same things stay together when you do that, because like these two only ever alternate in the middle. So it's like 2 3 3 2 2 3 3 2. So I don't think I like this. So I think I need to try something else. And maybe also try putting the dog in the bedroom for a few minutes. Okay, so this version is sort of what I've been picturing in my head the whole time. Is if you start at the top there, it goes lightest to darkest. And then you imagine taking that one block, that one dark block, and putting it here and shoving everything over. And so they're in the same order. They've just, the end block has come around to this end. And then you do that again. You shove them over. That end block goes around there until you end up with this. This is fun because you end up with diagonals of the same, like the pale is the diagonal throughout the quilt, and then there's a 3 and a 2, and then there's those 3 and those 2. So I think that could be interesting. The dark does always end up next to the lightest though, like the brown and the palest yellow, although there will be white sashing. I like that it's in color order, so you've got... Actually, you know, I've been thinking about it only in rows, but if you look at the columns, the same thing happens in the columns. So that is lightest to darkest, darkest to lightest. I think I like this one. I originally laid it out with the brown as the center in the opposite way. So the brown had the 4 diagonal in a row, but it made the brown, I felt it made the brown very prominent, and that's not my favorite out of the 4 of them. So then I decided to try it with the light one. I feel like I need to figure out a way to mock this up on the computer, like even with Excel or something, I think might help me picture this and would stop these blocks gathering more black fluff than they have already gathered, even after I vacuumed. Because someone can't leave them alone, can you? Go in. Go in. Hello. Okay, so now I think you can see the difference between these two fabrics a little better. And there, now it's touching all 4 different yellows. Okay, seeing them all together like this, it's a definite. It's this one. That looks so gray when it's put with all this stuff. Hello. You in the way? Want to sit on my lap? No? Do you get black fluff on everything? Yeah, you do. Yeah, you do. Come here. Come here, my little buddy. But yeah, so I think I don't know how I want to lay them out yet, but I do know which white is going to be the sashing. So then I know that the other one I can use for other projects. Possibly pajama piping. What's your problem? Okay, so while I was still deciding what layout I wanted, I still wanted to do some sewing on this, and I figured what I could do without knowing the layout was sew a white sashing strip to the side of each block. So I've done that. And then I prepared these sashing strips that are going to go in between the rows of blocks. I pulled out 3 different yellow-based fabrics that were part of the scrappy bits here. You can see I had the beehives, the flowers, and I think the dot. Yeah, there's a dot. So I sewed those together because those will be sort of random. The distribution of these yellow squares, I mean, will be random in between all these blocks. And I think that was a few days ago, and then I needed some time to think and process and figure out exactly what I wanted to do. But I think I know the layout I want. I think it's actually the first one. Of course, it always is. I think it's the first one I tried. So I think, like, it's not that many pieces. There's 16 blocks. There's 5 of these. I'm gonna need 5 more white strips for the right-hand side on the end of each row, but that's not many pieces to sew together, and then I'll have a quilt. Oh my god. So I finally started sewing rows together. As you can see, I've got a sashing strip there. This is the top. I guess it's a square quilt, but this is what I'm thinking of as the top. That has sashing there, and also here. And now I'm about to sew the next row of blocks on. And I was going to sew a sashing strip here onto the bottom of this before I attached it here, so it was easier to get through the machine. But I've already sewed a sashing strip to the 3rd row by accident. I thought it was this one, but I got mixed up. So this is next. And it's so exciting! So as you can see, this is my sewing table. I've had to move the machine back to give myself 16 plus inches here to fit this row of blocks on, and even then, I only get 3 and a bit blocks. So I pin up to here, and then shove it over and pin the last block. Although I did just realize I have this haul table, and up until a couple minutes ago, it had a whole bunch of stuff on it. But now I realized maybe I could use that for pinning. It's still not long enough, but my other table's not long enough either. And so this way I don't have to keep moving my sewing machine around. Hi everybody, it's Conan and I again. And I think you can probably guess what I want to show you today. This is my finished Birdling quilt top. And it's done. Well, no, it's not really done. The top is done. Nothing else is done. But this is the crazy part, and like I can't stop staring at it. I finished it yesterday, and I put it up here on my bookcase. This is actually for size comparison. If you've ever been to an IKEA, behind here is one of those 5x5 calyx units. Momentary pause while the dog rearranges the quilt. Excuse me, sir. But yeah, so this quilt almost entirely covers a full 5x5 calyx unit. It's about 70 to 71 inches square. And as you can see, I wasn't even able to get it all in the same shot because it's 4x4. So the row closest to the ground you can't see right now. There is a row of sashing up here. There's another, which is one of these white stripes. So the top of the quilt has the white sashing. That's currently under a bunch of baskets and books and ornaments and stuff to keep it in place. But I finished it! It's amazing. I love it. I put it up here yesterday and I haven't moved it because I just like looking at it. Like when I come out of my bedroom in the mornings, it's right there. It's in my living room, which is like the main part of my house that's visible from just about everywhere else. So I love it. And I keep wanting to move out of the frame so you can just look at it, which I find interesting, but I'm sure probably is less interesting to other people. I also want to say my last video was about these overalls, my little short overalls. I love them. It's a long weekend this weekend. I've worn them every day. They're gonna go in the laundry after the long weekend, but they're just like the perfect casual, cute little farmer overall outfit to put on. I went to the farmer's market wearing these yesterday. They're so comfy. It's the Burnside Bibs pattern. You can look at my last video where I talk a little bit more about them. They've got this great drawstring, but this is what we're here to talk about today, which is much more interesting. And as I was making it, I was thinking of how I might want to arrange the blocks. After playing around on the floor and trying to keep Conan out of it, I used Excel to try a few different options. This final design, in the end, was always what I pictured in my head when I was making it. I just wanted to try out all those other ones to make sure I was making the best decision. So what I like most about this is like the color order, going from dark to light all across here, or light to dark that way. And I really like it because I love that there's actually 2 rows where they're in this color order. So 1, 2, 3, 4. And then if you go down, they go 4, 3, 2, and then the bottom one is the darkest one again. I also like the diagonal pattern it makes, with the darkest ones sort of taking up the center and being sort of the focal diagonal line. And then also when you look this way, I just realized I feel like a meteorologist on TV. When the weather front moves this way, the colors get lighter. But yeah, if you look at this diagonal line, it's getting sort of darker as you go towards this corner. This corner sort of starts with the number 3, or no, the number 2, the second most dark, and then gets lighter, lighter, switches to dark, and then lighter, lighter, lighter. I just really enjoy it. One of the other options I considered was doing this same concept, only instead of moving them over this way, move the next row over this way, which would basically be the same design, only with the lightest yellow as the central diagonal line. And I thought I might like that more because honestly, this one out of the 4 solid shades is not my favorite. It is quite brown. It is a shade of yellow, but it does lean brown. But when I did the mock-up on my floor, with just the loose blocks, it looked a little weird to me with the palest one in the center. So those cornerstones, which are, there's 5 little squares in every row, I cut out of this yellow floral, this sort of honeybee beehive fabric, and then this yellow dot, which I also have an extra chunk of, which is going to be the binding when the quilt is all quilted and stuff. So those 3 are very similar in tone. They're about this yellow, slightly lighter than this yellow, but yet darker than the lightest. And I cut out those little cubes, or squares, sewed them into rows with 5 of the squares and then 4 of the white strips. Yeah, I think it worked out really well. I arranged them fairly randomly. I tried to make sure, at least when I was sewing the rows, that I didn't have two the same in a row. I did not think about, and on purpose, I knew this was going to be too hard to figure out. I did not think about how that would work in the columns and like whether we would have multiple of the same in the columns. I honestly haven't even looked at that, but I think they're pretty well distributed. They're also small enough that you don't really notice, like, oh, there's the dot and then the dot again and then the dot again. So I don't think you really notice that part. This quilt is far from perfect. I think in one of my last videos about it, I had talked about when I was finishing the squares, or finishing up the squares, and then you're supposed to trim them down, and I think they were supposed to be 16 inches. I can't remember what the measurement was. But I noticed that if I actually trimmed my blocks to that size, I was going to lose some points, and like I've lost that point. And so my blocks, I trimmed them down as much as I could. I think they were mostly 16 1/4. So it's just like a 1/4 inch over that I didn't want to trim that edge and lose that seam allowance, so the triangle would be nice. In some places, even at that size, it still didn't quite work out. I was worried about it, but you step back, you barely notice that stuff. The worst error is actually right here. This cornerstone, for some reason, is like a 1/4 inch off. It's a 1/4 inch too far this way compared to this row. It's perfect on this row. Bad here. And yet this one lines up nicely. This one lines up pretty okay. Why is this one so weird? I don't know. Could I have unpicked it? I guess, but it's done. I'm not going to do that. I've spent a lot of time picking off threads. These fabrics, like I can't remember from the last quilt I made, I don't remember it being so frayy, but I feel like I've been picking off a lot of white threads and pale yellow threads off of stuff. From the time I spent on the floor figuring out the blocks, they all gathered a lot of dog hair, even though I vacuumed right before I did it, and black threads, which again I thought I'd vacuumed up, but black threads for making these. So I've been doing a lot of picking stuff off as I've been ironing. There's thread everywhere. There's thread on the dog right now, I can see it. But yeah, this is my gorgeous quilt. And it's such a sunny, summery quilt. And I actually finished it, or at least finished the top, in the summer. The same summer that I bought the fabric, because I'll link the video to my first quilt I ever made, which I completed a few years ago, that took from buying the fabric to finally finishing it 6 years. With a lot of time obviously not working on it, but that's how I get with projects. I'm very good at the first 90% of a project, and then the last like 5 to 10% can sit for a long time. But yeah, I'm so happy to have this finished in the summer. I really want to do the backing, and then I'm going to send it off to get quilted, because my blue quilt I quilted myself on my little domestic 20-year-old machine, and I did it, but I don't want to do it again. And I can only manage straight lines with that machine. I tried free motion, which is technically possible, but it's just too hard on the little machine with a quilt, and this is bigger than the last one I made too. So I'm going to send it off and get someone else to do the quilting, someone with the giant long arm machine. But let me get the backing for you and we can look at that. So this is my backing fabric. This is the only fabric from a different manufacturer. Everything in here, 10 fat quarters, 1 yard or meter. It's so hard ordering fabric in Canada because some shops sell to you in yards, some shops sell to you in meters. I think a fat quarter is always a fat quarter cut from a yard, but I'm not certain. So anyway, 10 of the patterned fat quarters, which are all these guys, 1 yard each of each solid, so that's 4 yellows and the white. And that was it for the top. And then I think I bought that dot fabric for the binding. I think that's 3/4 of a probably meter. I think that store was meters. So all this stuff I bought from Thread Count Fabrics. I believe they're in Manitoba, I think. Bought online from them. They're the ones that had the fat quarter bundle that just sucked me in immediately and popped this image into my brain. So then this fabric, I know this I bought in Yards, because I bought this from Fabric Spark, which is here in Toronto, but I bought online. And I just checked my email to see how much I actually bought, because I needed to start doing the calculations to do the backing. And I bought 5 yards of this. So you can see this is a cute little wildflower sort of thing in similar tones to the quilt top, but it's the only one that is not from Art Gallery Fabrics. So this whole collection is by Art Gallery Fabrics, and this is Ruby Star Society. And I think it's really cute because it's a lot of the similar colors, various yellows, but also, hey look, yellow's red. There are a couple other colors in this, like there's a pale green in the flower stems and a pale pink in some of the flowers, in addition to all the delicious yellows that are already in here. So this will be the backing. I sort of want to use up all my scrappy bits to maybe sew like a 4 or 5 inch wide column or row, depending which way you look at it, of all the scrappy bits. And then I'm gonna have to piece this together anyway, because quilting cotton is only about 44 inches wide. This is 70, and I'm going to want the flowers to run up and down with the top. I always think about this row as the top because this is the nicest, like this is the nice color, like chromatic row, or that one. But yeah, so I want the flowers to be running up and down, assuming this is the top, which means I'm going to have like 44 inches. And then I am going to have to piece, either just sew another piece of this next to it, which is possible, and then the backing would be all the same, or go a little fun, sew up that column with all the scrappy pieces, which I think I could get long enough. So it would be like flowers, column of strips going this way, and then more flowers. If I do it plain, that's just one seam I have to sew. Like I just have to basically cut this in half and sew it next to itself. Or if I decide to go the scrappy route, figure out what order I want to, figure out how I want to sew all those scraps up together, sew that, and then just sew these seams together. So the large part of the work, for me, is definitely done. The long arming and the quilting of it, someone else's problem, that I just have to pay to have a professional do. And to do a much better and prettier job than I will. I'm not certain how you square a quilt top up, like how you're certain it's square. I'm gonna have to figure that out. As you probably saw from the video where I had all the quilt squares out on the floor, I don't have a 70 by 70 floor space. And that, with the quilt squares on the floor, was before I introduced the white. And so that's added a few inches to the quilt. I guess I do have that space if I fold down my sewing table. My sewing table is a gate leg table, but there's just a lot of stuff on it, and I want to keep this sewing momentum going. I want to, like tonight I'm going to cut out a pair of PJs for myself. Right now all the yellow scraps are all over it because I was figuring out if and how I wanted to do that part. So I don't really like folding that table down, but I could in a pinch if I needed to do that to figure out if this quilt is actually square. In theory it should be. I mean, the blocks were square, and then the white stripes were straight edged, mostly. Close enough. Let's just have another look at this from a full distance. Hey puppy down there. But yeah, isn't that so fun? I guess it's kind of weird to have such a quilt in such summery colors when summertime really isn't curl up under the quilt time, but I don't know, it'll be happy and sunshiny and feel like summer when it's cold out. Okay, and this is all that's left over. I actually don't have that many leftovers. Like here's some of the patterned ones. Here's what I have left of the solids. Got some really tiny squares. These probably I won't put into the backing because I think that's a little too tiny. As you can see, some of these are little squares, little rectangles, larger squares. This is just what was left over from cutting out. As I said, I started with 1 meter each of these and a fat quarter each of these. There's a little more over here. Actually, I was auditioning I was seeing what I had in widths that matched, in case I did want to sew scraps together for the backing. Here's a little bit more. Here's the, I just showed you this, that's what I'm using for the binding. I did save the selvage edges because I liked that it had the color names. So I thought that was kind of cool. I'm not sure if, because the selvage edges are a little tougher than the rest of the fabric, I'm not sure if it would be bad to include those in whatever possible stripy column I do in the backing. So I don't know about that yet. But yeah, this is what I've got left over. It really doesn't feel like a lot, which is very nice considering I did my own calculations to figure out this exact, like to figure out how to use the 10 fat quarters in the size of quilt I wanted and then to divide up the backing into the different colors. I definitely did some quilt math on that before ordering, and I'm very happy to say that it worked out. So yeah, thanks for following me along on this quest to make a quilt. Okay, buddy, you're going back on the floor because you're actually kind of heavy. That guy is my workout because he's 20 pounds. Thank you so much for watching and helping me along on this quest to make a quilt. It's been great seeing everyone's comments on the YouTube videos and the Instagram posts. It's been so much fun sharing it with you, and I'll continue to share it and the progress I make on the backing and getting the quilting done, and then one day, hopefully still in 2023, the actual finished object will be so amazing. I can't wait for that moment. But for now, I'll say goodbye. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe and like if you can. It's so helpful. So nice to know you're out there, and I will talk to you later. Bye.